the energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
When President John F. Kennedy, in his January 1961 inaugural address said, "My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," I felt like he was talking to me. Growing up in the Bronx, I dreamed of visiting exotic places and making a difference in the world. When he created the Peace Corps a few months later, I was ready to pack my bags. I told my family that when I graduated from college, that was what I was going to do. They thought I'd forget about it, but I never did forget. When I was a senior in college, I applied to the Peace Corps and I was accepted to teach science to elementary school students in the Philippines. In June 1966, the day after my college graduation, I took my first ever plane ride. I flew to Boston for a 10-week Peace Corps training program. I was one of 54 trainees. We lived at the Ratcliffe Quad. Our time was divided between practice teaching at a local elementary school under the guidance of local science teachers and learning about the country that would be our home for 2 years. For that, our instructors were Filipino graduate students studying at Cornell University. Ramon Eki Cardenas was my cultural studies instructor, and Patricia Tati Laquanan was my language teacher. I flew to the Philippines on September 12, 1966, my 21st birthday. In one fell swoop, I went from the Bronx to Tacurong, a small town on the island of Mindanao, where there were carabao, pigs, and chickens in my front yard. When I first was accepted by the Peace Corps and assigned to the Philippines, I had visions of sandy beaches, ocean breezes, and swaying palm trees. Tacurong was nothing like that. It was dirty, dusty, and dangerous. I lived with a doctor and her mother who were very concerned if I went out alone. So when I wasn't at home, I spent my time at the elementary school where I was a science teacher. As much as I liked my fellow teachers, and as warm and friendly as they were to me, and as much as I liked being in the classroom, Tacurong was just too dangerous a place for me to stay. After a series of local murders, the Peace Corps decided I had to spend my second year someplace else. I was moved to the bustling city of Davao, where I was very happy. I lived on a beautiful, clean street and had my very own apartment. Well, an apartment that I shared with a variety of different roommates. The center of my life was my work at an organization called Bayanihang Manggagawa, which means a brotherhood of workers. We conducted training programs to help campesinos who were being forced off their land where they had been squatters prepare for jobs as city dwellers. I enjoyed my work at Bayanihang a lot, but the most important part of Bayanihang was one of its board members, a businessman named Antonio Diaz, Ding Diaz. Ding brought me to his home to meet his wife Elsie. When Ding and Elsie introduced me to their 3 children, Anthony, Natalie, and Donna, they said, "This is Tita Marian." In that moment, I became a member of the family. My relationship with the Diaz family was a very important part of my experience as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Philippines. Their youngest child, Donna, and I really bonded. Since the office where I worked was in the same building where the Diazes lived, I got to see them pretty much every day. When my parents came from the United States to visit me, the Diazes greeted them like they were family because I had become family. And when I left the Philippines after my 2 years of service, the Diaz family came to Manila to say goodbye. And it was Donna, my sweet Donna, who gave me my despedida, or farewell present, which was a plaque from Bayanihan Magagawa, which still hangs in my New York apartment more than 50 years later. I took the long way home, stopping in Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Thailand, Cambodia, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, each place more exotic than the last. I ended up where I had started 2 years before, in New York, but this time not in the Bronx. I found an apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where I still live. I had a relatively easy time finding a job because my experience at Bayanihan had trained me well. There was an extensive national initiative to get people off welfare and into work, and so there was a proliferation of training programs that were supported by the federal government, and I was able to get a job with the United States Department of Labor. I stayed in touch with the Diazes, but in those days it was letters and the occasional 3-minute phone call that was more expensive than a whole week of cell phone service. I had always hoped to return to the Philippines, but the years passed and I became more entrenched in my New York life. Then, in 1980, 12 years after I left the Philippines, I had a conversation with Ding, and he asked me to come and visit the family for Christmas. I decided to take him up on his invitation and took the long trip from New York to Davao City. By this time, Ding and Elsie's family had expanded. There were 2 more children, Mitzi and JB, in addition to Anthony, Natalie, and Donna, and the whole extended Diaz family. Even though it had been a dozen years since I had been with the family, it felt as if I had never left. Elsie and I shared the same jokes. Ding was as warm and supportive as he ever was, and the kids, they were just fabulous. And my Donna was growing up. After 2 weeks, I said goodbye to the Diazes and headed north to spend New Year's in Baguio, one of my favorite places, which is in the mountain province of the Philippines. I was walking through the market one day and ran into, of all people, Ramon Eki Cardenas, who had been one of my Peace Corps trainers in 1966. Eki and I were happy to see each other. He asked if I had seen Tati, my language instructor, during training. I said no. He told me she had married Tim Peterson, who had been in the first Peace Corps group to come to the Philippines, and that they were living in Manila, and that Tati was expecting a baby. So the very last thing I did on my 1980s Christmas-New Year's trip to the Philippines was to spend an evening with the people who had taught me all about the Philippines, Ramon Cardenas and Patricia Laquanan. And I got to meet Tati's husband, Tim. Most returned Peace Corps volunteers will tell you that they have a special interest in the current events of the country where they served. It has always been true for me. In the mid-1980s, I avidly followed the development of the Philippines People Power Revolution. Ferdinand Marcos had first been elected president in 1965. A heavy hand when dealing with opposition had kept him in power for more than 2 decades. It took the widely supported candidacy of Corazon Aquino, the wife of a slain opposition leader, to finally put an end to the choke lock Marcos had on the country. But he wasn't going without a fight. When I learned that Ding was one of Aquino's leading organizers in the Davao area, I called offering to send a donation. No, Marian, don't send money. Use it to buy a ticket to come to the Philippines. I want you to be here with the family. It's important. Much to the concern of my family and friends, that's exactly what I did. Ding was waiting for me at the airport the morning I arrived from New York. He had spent the night before standing in front of military tanks on the EDSA Highway in Manila. We boarded a plane for Davao and went to an Aquino rally with the family as soon as we arrived. Marcos was refusing to surrender power, even though Aquino had won the election. Then came days of waiting, devouring any news we could get. While we waited, we did lots of eating to calm our nerves. Schools were closed, so all the children were home. Donna was a medical student, and her boyfriend, classmate Mike Columbus, was a constant visitor. The evening the news came that Marcos was leaving the country and Cory Aquino would be assuming power, there was dancing in the streets and neighborhood-wide fiestas. Sharing that experience with the Diaz family was one of the highlights of my life. I learned firsthand that determined, united people could create a peaceful revolution. Filipinos were an example for the world. I still treasure the Aquino campaign memorabilia I collected. It would be 3 years before I saw Ding and Elsie again. They were traveling around the United States with their 2 youngest children, Mitchie and JB, and came to visit me in New York. I was so happy to have an opportunity to host them on my home turf. Their timing was perfect. I had just gotten an office for my growing business as a communications consultant. The Diazes blessed my new space, and Ding predicted that I would be a big success. The Diaz family was my good luck charm. My business flourished. My primary client was DEMA, the Diving Equipment Manufacturers Association, the trade association of the American scuba diving industry. I got to work with the stars of the underwater world, people like Jacques Cousteau and Dr. Sylvia Earle. I also promoted an eclectic mix of authors, bold-faced names, and nonprofits. Most fascinating was my work with UN agencies and world conferences. In 1995, I was hired to be a communications consultant for the Secretariat of the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women, which was scheduled to take place in Beijing that summer. They were particularly interested in having me promote the official spokeswomen for the event. One was the Secretary General of the conference, who was from Tanzania. The other was the chair of the UN Commission on the Status of Women, who was from the Philippines. Her name? Dr. Patricia Laquanan. Yes, it was the same Tati Laquanan who had been my language instructor during my Peace Corps training. Being part of the UN team in Beijing was all the more unforgettable because I got to share the experience with Tati. We have been friends ever since. In 1998, I spent a few months traveling around the world. It had been 30 years since I left the Peace Corps. As I traveled, I wrote a personal journal for MSNBC.com's travel section. A visit to the Philippines was a prominent part of my itinerary. In Manila, Tati Laquanan, her husband Tim Peterson, and their children Carl and Andrea and I had dinner with Eki Cardenas, old friends who had been brought together by the Peace Corps. A highlight of my stay in Manila was meeting Corazon Aquino at an event I attended with Tim and Tati. Then it was off to Davao to reunite with Elsie, Ding, and the extended Diaz family. I was greeted like a long-lost relative. Donna was married to Mike Columbus. They were both doctors and had 4 children, Mikey, Monique, Marco, and Therese. Right before I left, we organized a pool party for all the Diaz children. On the back of a photo, Ding had written a note and signed it in his granddaughter Therese's name. When I returned to New York, I resumed my consulting work and was fortunate to have an eclectic client roster. However, it wasn't long before I found myself dividing my time between work and caring for my aging parents. Tati and I were in contact, and I saw her and her family because they often came to the U.S. But despite my best intentions, I had lost touch with the Diaz family. Following the passing of my mom in 2014, I was once again free to travel, so I planned a return trip to the Philippines for the beginning of 2015. Before I left, I tracked down the Diaz family. I spoke to Donna and was sad to learn that Ding had died in 2013. U.S. State Department advisories had gotten me so nervous about traveling to Davao City that I told Donna that our reunion had to be in Manila. Donna, her husband Mike, and Elsie came to see me. Our reunion was bittersweet because Ding wasn't with us. When Elsie heard that I had taken care of my parents for so many years, she told me she was so proud that I had done it the Filipino way. While I was in Manila, I bonded with Donna's two eldest children, Monique, who is a lawyer, and Mikey, who was working as a photographer's assistant. I was their Tita Marian from New York. Tati took time from her busy schedule as the chair of the Commission on Higher Education so we could go to Boracay with her family. The star of the trip was her adorable grandson Lucas. This time when I said goodbye, there was no question that I'd see everyone again soon. A few months later, I met Donna and Mike and all four of their children in Italy. A year later, I rendezvoused with Donna and Mike in Brussels. With the help of a cachet of frequent flyer miles, I spent the winter of 2017 in the Philippines. This time, I chose to ignore the State Department's traveling warnings and flew directly to Davao. I arrived just in time to attend the wedding of Donna's son Marco, which was followed by the baptism of Ellie, her first grandchild. I got to spend time with Elsie and her family. From Davao, I went to Manila, where I rented an apartment in the newly developed Bonifacio Global City. BGC is the Philippines' version of Manhattan. I felt right at home. Donna and Mike have a condo there, which their son Mikey was living in. He was my kasama, my constant companion. Monique, a newlywed, is now working in the office of President Rodrigo Duterte and arranged for all of us to take a tour of Malacañang Palace. The first time I was there was in 1986 when I went with her grandparents after Corazon Aquino became president. I had Sunday lunches with Tati and her family and spent time with her daughter-in-law Des and grandson Lucas. This time, the beach vacation was in Bohol. It was my interaction with Donna that was the most extraordinary element of this trip. It had been 50 years since I had first come into her life. The precocious 3-year-old was an accomplished doctor. For 25 years, Donna and Mike have run CalMed, an alternative medicine clinic in Davao. In addition, they produce a potent line of herbal remedies. 5 years ago, they started offering stem cell therapy to their clients. "I can help you stay healthy, Tita," she said as she described the benefits of autologic stem cell therapy. After meeting a few of her patients, I decided to take the leap and have the procedure. It has made an enormous difference in my life. I was a chronic insomniac for decades and can now sleep without pharmaceuticals. My sciatic back pain is a thing of the past. I had not planned to make this a wellness trip, but that's what it turned into. When I left the Philippines in 1968, it was Donna who gave me my despedida, my farewell present. This time she gave me the greatest present of all, good health. And I'll have her guidance to make sure it stays that way for as long as possible. Thanks to Facebook and other social media, the extended Diaz-Columbus clan and Tati's family are part of my daily life. Joining the Peace Corps set the course for my life. I am grateful to John F. Kennedy for inspiring me to serve my country and for creating a way for me to do it. I am grateful to the Peace Corps for assigning me to the Philippines and to Ding and Elsie Diaz for embracing me as a member of their family. And I am grateful to Patricia Tati Laquanan for teaching me about the country she loves and for decades of friendship.